All right, so we're diving into some serious Roman history today. Yeah, and I have to say, these sources are fascinating. Absolutely, you're looking at the mid-2nd century BCE. Okay, Rome is really making its presence known around the Mediterranean, yet especially in Greece and North Africa. Right, but you flag some pretty specific events here. Yeah, and it seems like you want to understand, but just like what happened. Right, but how these battles and conflicts really shaped the course of European history. Yeah, I think what's interesting here is that you've got this mix of direct confrontations, and then those moments where Rome exerted power without even engaging in a full-blown war. Right. It's a testament to their growing influence, right, but also to the anxieties that they instilled in other power. Yeah, like that story of Antiochus V. Being forced to back down by the Roman envoy Laenius. He draws a circle in the sand, right, essentially telling Antiochus, cross this and it's war. It's a powerful image. That's a serious power play, right? It's more than just power, though. It's about psychology. Oh, okay. Laenius' circle became this almost legendary symbol of Roman authority. Imagine you're a ruler, right? Maybe considering challenging Rome. Yeah. That image is going to stick with you, right? Make you think twice about the consequence. Absolutely. It's a bloodless victory that resonates for generations. Yeah, it makes you wonder if that's why some of my Perses of Macedon, right, decided to just go head-to-head with Rome. Yeah. Almost like you had to prove something. Yeah. Even if it meant sparking the Third Macedonian War. I think if we connect this to the bigger picture, you can see how these individual conflicts fit into Rome's overall strategy. The Macedonian kingdom was a major power, right? A legacy of Alexander the Great. By dismantling it, turning it into their 6th province, right? Rome wasn't just winning a war. They were eliminating a rival, right, and reshaping the political landscape of the entire region. So what does this all mean for someone looking at the long view of European history? Well, I mean, some of the foundations of empires here. Exactly. The Roman Republic's expansion wasn't just about conquest. It was about establishing a new order in Europe, right? And these early victories, the way they were achieved, set a precedent for Roman dominance that would have a ripple effect for centuries. Wow. Think about the legal systems, the language, the cultural influence. Yeah. It all stems from this period of expansion. Okay. But it wasn't just about kings and circles in the sand, right? Right. Carthage is another example. But yeah, it seems like resentment and maybe even fear fueled the conflict. The Second Punic War had ended decades earlier. But the memory of Hannibal, right, at the gates of Rome, that was still fresh in the minds of many. But Carthage had rebuilt itself, become prosperous, and to some in the Roman Senate, that was a threat that needed to be dealt with permanently. But wasn't there also this idea that having a potential enemy like Carthage around, actually kept Rome unified? Interesting than a common purpose, right? Kind of like the enemy of my enemy is my friend, even if that friend is also a threat. That's the debate that was happening in the Senate. And it shows the complexity of Roman strategic thinking. Wow. Ultimately, though, it was Carthage's attack on Numidia in 149 BCE, right, a violation of their treaty with Rome, that gave the war faction the justification they needed. They say never underestimate your enemy. But it seems like Carthage underestimated Roman ruthlessness. Yeah, the destruction of the city in 106 BCE, right, is a turning point. Absolutely, not just for Carthage, but for how Rome will be perceived on the world stage. It was a message sent to the entire Mediterranean world. Well, defy Rome, and this is your fate. Well, cities razed, populations enslaved or slaughtered. Oh, wow. And the territory renamed Africa Province. A chilling reminder of who was now in control. So by this point, Rome's military power is undeniable. Absolute. But it feels like we're just scratching the surface here. Yes. What would the long-term consequences of these victories, right? Did Rome's focus on external enemy blind them to the problems brewing at home? Let's delve into that next. Today, it's fascinating how Rome's military triumphs actually laid the groundwork for some of his internal struggle. Interesting. We've talked about these, consequences of expansion, right? But to really understand it, I think we need to look Yet the Roman army itself, okay, it wasn't a professional force like we might think up today. You're talking about the citizen farmers, radically, guys that had to leave their fields soon to go fight for Rome. Right, which makes sense. You're defending their own land, their own republic. Right, but if you're constantly at war, yeah, that's gotta take a toll. Exactly, and the Roman Republic's military campaigns, right, were becoming increasingly ambitious. Soldiers were away for years at a time, often returning to find their farms neglected, wow, families struggling. Jeez. This created a whole class of veterans, right, who were, in a sense, casualties of Rome's success. I see what you mean about unintended consequences, right? They win these wars, yeah, by the Republic, but the very people fighting those wars are paying the price back home. And it gets more complicated. How did Rome finance its wars? How? Plunder. Oh, they brought back vast wealth, conquered territories, yeah, gold, silver, slaves, not. But this wealth wasn't evenly distributed. So while the average soldier is struggling to rebuild his life race, the Roman elite are getting richer and more powerful. Exactly. That didn't go over too well. You're catching on, yeah. This influx of wealth, okay, combined with the availability of cheap slave labor, the conquered regions, right, completely changed the economic landscape of Rome. Well, wealthy landowners had amassed huge estates, worked by slaves, yeah, and undercut the small farmer. Wow, it's a classic case of the rich getting richer on the expense of the poor. Wait, so these soldiers are risking their lives for Rome? Yeah, come home to find their farms failing, and meanwhile they're being squeezed out, right, by these huge slave-run estates. Exact. The talk about a system rigged against the little guy. That's a great way to put it. And this is where Tiberius Gracchus enters the picture. Okay, he recognized the inherent danger in the situation. A large and growing class of landless, disaffected citizens, yeah, many of them veterans, right, that's a recipe for social unrest. He's the guy that tried to push through that land redistribution law, right? Yeah, the Sempronian land law. That's right. From what I've read, that was a pretty radical move. Yes, for Rome aristocrat. It was a direct challenge to the status quo. Wow. And it gives us some real insight, to the political tensions of the time. Tiberius, though, a nobleman himself, right, was deeply influenced by Greek philosophy, particularly ideas of social justice and the importance of a stable citizenry. So he saw this growing wealth disparity, the plight of these veterans, right, and thought, this is unsustainable. Yeah, Rome's gonna implode if we don't fix this. That's a good summation. Okay. The Sempronian land law aimed to reclaim public land that had been illegally occupied by large landowners, and redistribute it to landless citizens. Interesting. It was an attempt to break up these massive estates, give ordinary Romans a chance to own land, and essentially restore the balance that had been lost. That's only a pretty bold move. It was, especially for someone from the elite class. Yeah. Didn't he meet some serious resistance from the Senate? Oh, absolutely, yeah. I can't imagine they were too thrilled, right, about giving up their land, and their cheap labor force. You're absolutely right. Yeah. The Senate, dominated by the very landowners, who benefited from this system, of course, saw the Sempronian land law, as an attack on their wealth and privilege, right? They used all their political power to obstruct it, and things got ugly. What do you mean by ugly? Well, we just voted down. It went far beyond political maneuvering. Tiberius was ultimately assassinated. Giant mob of senators and their supporters. Oh my God. This act of violence sent shockwaves through Roman society. It showed how far the elite was willing to go to protect their interests, and how deep the divisions within the Republic had become. So we've got these incredible military victories abroad. Yeah, but at home, Rome is starting to tear itself apart over land, wealth, and power. It's almost like their own success set the stage for their downfall. Right, so you're saying. It's a complex story, but the connections are undeniable. Yeah, Rome's expansion created the conditions for both its greatness and its eventual decline. Wow. And the story of Tiberius Gracchus, illustrates the profound social and economic consequences, of their military success. Right. The question is, could they have reconciled these internal tensions? Or was their reliance on conquest and plunder ultimately unsustainable? Well, let's unpack that further in the final part of our dive. We've been tracing Rome's rise to power, the battles that shaped their dominance, but also those internal cracks. Yeah, they were starting to show. Yeah, it's like this paradox. Military success abroad, fueling social unrest at home. How did those two things become so intertwined? Well, a key piece of this puzzle is understanding just how deeply Rome's economy was tied to its military conquests. Okay. It wasn't just about expanding territory. It was about the spoils of war. We've talked about plunder slaves. Yeah. All the wealth flowing back to Rome. But I'm still trying to wrap my head around the impact on everyday Romans. Okay. Especially those citizen farmers who made up the army. What did their lives actually look like right after these long campaigns? Imagine you're a Roman farmer. Okay. They've been away for years, fighting in Greece or Africa. Yeah. You come home and your farm's been neglected. Maybe even sold off to pay debts. Jeez. Meanwhile, the price of grain is plummeting. Right. Because the market's flooded with cheap imports from conquered territories. Okay. It's a recipe for economic ruin. And to add insult to injury, they're now competing with slave labor. Likely. I mean, if you're a wealthy landowner, why hire a Roman farmer? When you can get slaves to work for next to nothing. Precisely. So you have this growing mass of landless, unemployed citizens. Wow. Many of them veterans, who are increasingly resentful of the system. Makes sense. They've risked their lives for Rome. Have they gotten in return? Poverty and displacement. It's like their own victories came back to haunt them. No wonder someone like Tiberius Gracchus emerged, trying to change the system. He understood that the root of the problem was land ownership. His law aimed to put land back into the hands of ordinary Romans, which would have reduced the reliance on slave labor. He also proposed limits on the amount of grain that could be imported, trying to protect Roman farmers from being undercut by these cheap foreign goods. So he was trying to address both the economic and social consequences of Rome's military expansion. It's interesting to see how these internal struggles were directly tied to their foreign policy, their way of waging war. But his reforms failed. And he ended up assassinated. What does that tell us about Rome at this point? I think Tiberius's fate is a stark reminder that challenging the status quo, especially when it comes to the distribution of wealth and power, can be incredibly dangerous. His assassination marked a turning point, a descent into political violence and instability that would ultimately consume the Republic. It's a tragic story. It is, but also a cautionary tale. Rome's obsession with military conquest ultimately undermined the very foundations of their society. They built an empire on the backs of their own citizens and came back to bite them. What's fascinating here now that this dynamic isn't unique to ancient Rome. Throughout history, I'll see empires and nations grapple with the same challenges. How to balance military expansion with internal stability. How to ensure that the benefits of conquest are shared equitably. That's a great point. It's a lesson that resonates even today. I think you've given our listener a lot to think about. Thanks. We've gone beyond the dates and battles. Explored how these events rippled through Roman society and connected them to broader themes that are still relevant today. Absolutely. And that's what a real deep dive is all about. Absolutely is about making those connections, understanding the complexities and seeing how the past informs the present. I agree. And on that note, we'll leave you with one final question to ponder. Could Rome have avoided its eventual downfall? If it had addressed these internal problems, or was its reliance on conquest and plunder ultimately unsustainable? That's the question. Is a question that historians are still debating today. Absolutely. And one that offers valuable insights into the nature of power, empire, and the human condition. Well said. Thanks for joining us on this deep dive. Thanks for having me.